Clara Evans arrived at her parents' home for the traditional Sunday dinner, a ritual she had attended since childhood. The familiar scent of roast chicken and rosemary wafted through the hallway as she set down her coat, expecting another predictable evening of polite conversation, shared stories, and perhaps a little parental nagging about her single life. But as she entered the dining room, her heart sank. There, seated comfortably at the table with wide grins, was her younger sister Laura, along with Laura's husband Paul and their 2 children. Their presence hadn't been mentioned beforehand, an omission that immediately put Clara on edge. Laura's eyes sparkled with a peculiar triumph, the kind Clara remembered all too well from their competitive childhood. The dinner began with forced pleasantries, but underneath the laughter, Clara sensed an undercurrent of tension. Laura and Paul exchanged knowing glances, their children whispering excitedly between bites of mashed potatoes. Clara tried to ignore it, focusing instead on her father's predictable monologue about market fluctuations and her mother's gentle reminders to eat more vegetables. Then, midway through the meal, Laura set down her glass of wine with theatrical calm. "We've decided," she began casually, "that we'll be moving into the lake house next week, just until our foundation gets repaired." Her tone carried the arrogance of someone who had already won. The room went silent, save for the clinking of silverware. Clara's fork froze midair. Before she could respond, she heard her niece whisper, "I want the room with the balcony," followed by her nephew's quick claim to the one with the lake view. In that instant, the truth hit Clara with icy clarity. This wasn't a request. It was a coordinated ambush. Her family had rehearsed this moment, counting on her to yield out of obligation or guilt. Instead, Clara's jaw tightened. A storm of disbelief and simmering anger rose within her, though she forced herself to remain composed. The battle for her sanctuary had begun. The words spilled out of Clara before she could even stop herself. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. For 6 long years, she had poured her energy, her savings, and her heart into the lake house. It wasn't just property, it was her sanctuary, her proof that she could rebuild after the collapse of her marriage. Every floorboard she had chosen, every window she had replaced, every dollar of the $15,000 invested carried with it the weight of her struggle and her independence. To surrender it now felt like erasing her own survival. Laura blinked in disbelief, as if refusal had never been considered an option. A faint, mocking smirk tugged at the corners of her lips, the kind Clara had seen 1,000 times when they were children. Laura always the favored daughter, always confident that she would get her way in the end. But Clara was no longer the quiet sister who gave in to keep the peace. With steady hands, she reached into her leather satchel and placed a thick folder squarely in the middle of the dining table. The sound echoed like a gavel striking wood. "You should know," Clara said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "that the house won't be habitable for the next 9 months. Renovations begin Monday morning. Everything is already under contract." The boldness of her declaration rippled across the table. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Laura's smug smile faltered, her face tightening as the realization sank in. Paul shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fork clattering against his plate. Even their children stopped whispering, their excitement replaced by confusion. Her mother Eleanor gave a small, nervous laugh, as though trying to soften the blow. Her father Robert leaned back, narrowing his eyes as if reevaluating his strategy. And Laura's face turned from triumph to stunned silence, her glass of wine trembling slightly in her hand. Clara sat straighter, meeting each gaze with quiet defiance. She had given up years of comfort, sacrificed countless evenings, and rebuilt her life piece by piece within those lake house walls. If her family thought they could claim it with a casual announcement over dinner, they were gravely mistaken. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of words, it was the collapse of their plan. Robert Evans set down his wine glass with deliberate precision, the way a seasoned negotiator would before making his opening statement. His voice dropped into the measured cadence Clara had grown up hearing in boardrooms and conference calls that bled into family dinners. "Clara," he began, his tone clipped and authoritative, "you're being unreasonable. Families make sacrifices for one another. That house is a resource, our resource, and Laura needs it now more than you do. Clara felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected this, even rehearsed it in her head. Her father was never one to ask. He dictated, framed his demands as if they were logical inevitabilities. Before she could respond, Eleanor leaned forward, her hands folded like a supplicant's prayer. "Darling, think of the children. They're already so excited. Imagine their disappointment if you shut them out. Surely you wouldn't deny your own niece and nephew a safe roof over their heads." It was a performance Clara knew by heart. Her father, the hard-edged executive, her mother, the emotional diplomat. A strategy designed to corner her. She took a slow sip of water, buying herself a moment. Her voice, when it came, was calm, deliberate. "I am thinking of the children. That's why I don't let them run into traffic just because they're excited about chasing a ball. And that's why I won't let them move into a house that's about to be gutted by construction crews." Robert's jaw tightened. He leaned forward now, lowering his voice to a dangerous growl. "If you insist on being obstinate, don't expect to be included in future family considerations." "You know exactly what I mean." The threat was naked, the will. Clara saw the flicker in his eyes. The unspoken promise of disinheritance, a tool he had wielded over her more than once. Laura smirked faintly, as if victory had been restored. But Clara only set her fork down and folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. Then she looked directly at her father, unflinching. "Your poor planning," she said evenly, her words slicing through the room, "does not constitute my emergency." The sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Silence fell again, thicker this time, tinged with shock. Robert's face darkened, the corners of his mouth twitching as if he had been struck with his own weapon. Eleanor's eyes darted between them, searching for a way to mend the break, but there was none. For the first time that evening, Clara felt the balance of power shift. She was no longer the daughter expected to yield. She was the executor of her own boundaries. By the time Clara pulled out of her parents' driveway, her hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had fueled her composure at dinner was ebbing, leaving behind a hollow ache in her chest. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if she had gone too far, if standing her ground meant severing herself completely from the family she had spent her life trying to belong to. But as the lights of the city thinned and the quiet road to the lake, house opened before her, resolve surged back. That house was more than timber and glass. It was her proof of survival, the one place that belonged solely to her. She would not, could not, surrender it. The moment she parked in the gravel driveway, Clara pulled out her phone and dialed David, her contractor. "I need you to move up the timeline," she said, her voice low but steady. "Security system, cameras, every access point reinforced by tomorrow morning. No delays." David hesitated. "That's fast, Clara. I can try, but—" "Not try," Clara cut in. "Do it, and bring extra locks, heavy-duty ones. If it costs more, I'll cover it. Just make it airtight." She hung up before he could argue further. Her next calls went to the locksmith, the alarm company, and the waste management service. Within hours, a pair of hulking construction dumpsters were scheduled to be delivered and dropped. In front of her garage, an unspoken barricade that would make casual intrusion impossible. When she finally stepped inside the lake house, the air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paint. The moonlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the space she had painstakingly rebuilt. Clara walked slowly from room to room, touching the cool banister of the staircase, the smooth counter in the kitchen, the sturdy oak door of her bedroom. Each surface grounded her. Each detail reminded her why she had fought so hard to keep it. Still, a gnawing unease tugged at her. Her family had ambushed her once. They would surely try again. And this time, they wouldn't come with polite conversation and veiled threats. They would come with force. Before bed, she gathered the spare keys and tossed them into the crackling flames of the fireplace. The metal hissed and blackened, warping under the heat until they were nothing but twisted fragments. Then she opened her journal and wrote in firm strokes, "They will come tomorrow. Be ready." As the house settled around her, Clara lay awake, listening to the hum of the night, every creak and sigh of the old timbers sharpening her awareness. She was no longer just a homeowner. She was a sentinel, standing guard over her fortress. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Monday morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of day when the lake shimmered like glass. Clara barely touched her coffee, her eyes fixed on the winding road that led to the house. She didn't have to wait long. At 9 a.m. sharp, the low rumble of a diesel engine grew louder until a massive moving truck lumbered into view, its wheels crunching over gravel like the opening march of an invading army. Laura stepped out of her SUV with sunglasses perched high on her head, radiating smug confidence as if the outcome were already decided. Behind her, Paul busied himself directing the movers, while the children cheered as though arriving at a summer resort. Clara walked out from the front porch with deliberate calm, a folder tucked under her arm. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. Instead, she pulled a crisp set of papers from the folder and held them where Laura could see. "Demolition permits," she said evenly. "Filed and approved. This house is uninhabitable starting today." Laura's confident smirk faltered, but only for a second. "You're bluffing," she snapped, waving the movers forward. "She's bluffing. Start unloading." Clara didn't flinch. She pressed a button on her phone, and the deep mechanical whir of construction equipment roared to life behind the house. Workers in neon vests moved about the property with clipboards and tool belts, their presence a silent confirmation of her words. Still unwilling to yield, Laura stormed toward the front door, fishing a gleaming spare key from her purse. She jammed it into the lock, twisting hard, only to be met with a sharp electronic beep. "Unauthorized entry detected," the smart lock's robotic voice announced. Echoing against the wooden beams of the porch, "This incident will be recorded." Laura froze, her face flushing crimson. Paul muttered a curse under his breath, while the movers hesitated, unsure whether to proceed. The moment stretched, heavy and awkward, the weight of Clara's preparations pressing down on them all. Then Laura exploded. "Fine!" she screamed, spinning toward the truck. "Dump it all. Dump everything on the lawn. She wants to play games. Let's see how she likes living in a junkyard." Obediently, the movers began unloading couches, boxes, lamps, and children's toys onto Clara's pristine grass. The chaos unfolded in a storm of cardboard and upholstery, her lawn transforming into a cluttered battlefield within minutes. Clara stood still, her arms crossed, watching every item hit the ground. Not once did she raise her voice or try to stop them. Her silence unnerved Laura more than any shouting could have. When the truck finally pulled away, leaving behind a grotesque monument of entitlement, Clara stepped forward, her voice steady as a blade. "Congratulations. Laura, you've just abandoned your property on mine. And now it's mine to deal with." Laura's mouth fell open, but no words came. Clara turned on her heel and walked back inside, the smart lock clicking shut behind her like the sound of a verdict being sealed. Laura's voice cracked as she screamed at the movers to stop, but the damage was already done. Dozens of her boxes and furniture pieces sat scattered across Clara's front lawn, like relics of a failed invasion. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some even lingering on the sidewalk to watch the spectacle unfold. Clara, however, did not flinch. Her silence was louder than Laura's tantrum. Instead of raising her voice, Clara took out her phone and, in full view of everyone, calmly called an auction house. "Yes," she said with crisp precision. "Please schedule a pickup this afternoon. I'll be donating the proceeds to the Foster Futures program." She ended the call, locked eyes with Laura, and added coldly, "You don't get to clutter my sanctuary with your chaos." Laura's face turned pale, her outrage suddenly mingled with fear. She realized Clara wasn't bluffing. Her sister's decisiveness was sharper than any courtroom verdict. Clara then retrieved a folder from her leather tote bag containing notarized documents, her ownership deeds, demolition permits, and a formal statement granting legal clearance for removal of abandoned property. Every paper bore an official seal, every word airtight. As the movers hesitated, unsure whom to obey, Clara handed them bottled water and thanked them for their patience. Her composure was disarming. The men nodded, quietly aligning themselves with Clara's authority, leaving Laura isolated. Moments later, Robert and Eleanor's car screeched into the driveway. They stepped out, their expressions a mix of disbelief and fury, only to be greeted by the sight of Laura's belongings being tagged for auction. Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls as if witnessing an unthinkable sacrilege. Robert stormed forward, voice booming. "Clara, this is outrageous." "This is family. You don't do this to your own blood." But Clara was ready. With the same unyielding calm, she produced a printed receipt of her upcoming charitable contribution. "Actually," she replied, voice steady and clear, "this is exactly what you taught me. To cut losses, redirect assets, and ensure value where it matters most. Foster children will sleep in beds tonight because of Laura's recklessness." "Tell me again, how is that outrageous?" The words struck like a gavel. Eleanor faltered, unable to weaponize guilt as she usually did. Robert, jaw clenched, seemed to recognize his own business philosophy being turned against him yet again. For the first time, Clara saw hesitation in their eyes. Not dominance, not authority, but doubt, the neighbors whispered. Phones clicked as photos were taken. The family's attempt to shame Clara had spectacularly backfired, leaving them exposed under the weight of her resolve. And Clara? She simply stood there, steady as stone, while the auction truck pulled up behind her. The fortress she had built was no longer just brick and mortar. It was discipline, law, and unbreakable will. 3 months passed, and the house, Clara's fortress, stood half-renovated, its scaffolding a testament to her persistence. But her family was not done. On a quiet Sunday evening, Clara agreed to dinner, only to discover she was outnumbered. Her parents had brought Father Michael, the family's long-trusted spiritual advisor, to the table. The air was heavy with unspoken strategy. Eleanor clasped her rosary, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Clara, all we want is family unity. Surely God does not intend for sisters to live in enmity." Robert leaned in with a rehearsed gravitas, adding, "We've given you everything, and now you repay us with division." Father Michael, his tone careful but probing, urged forgiveness, implying that Clara's stance was pride disguised as principle. Clara listened in silence, hands folded neatly on her lap, allowing each word to settle like chess pieces on a board. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no anger, only precision. "Do you remember the storm 3 years ago? The one that left the basement under 4 feet of water?" She slid her phone across the table. On the screen were dated photos, soaked carpets, warped furniture, black mold crawling up the walls. "While you were vacationing in Italy, I was the one knee-deep in that mess, paying for restoration out of my savings. Not a word from you, not an ounce of help." Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Robert's gaze shifted downward. Clara pressed on, her tone measured but unyielding. "You speak of family unity only when it benefits you. Let's not pretend this dinner is about reconciliation. It's about control. And I know about the will you rewrote 6 months ago, after I refused to co-sign Paul's gambling debts." The color drained from Robert's face. Eleanor's hands trembled on the tablecloth. Even Father Michael leaned back, caught off guard by the precision of her strike. "The irony," Clara continued, "is that you thought your secrets gave you leverage. But secrets rot from the inside out. You're cornered, not me." Silence thickened. The family's script had unraveled. The authority they once wielded so effortlessly now lay fractured, exposed under the weight of Clara's evidence and composure. Clara stood, gathering her purse. "I don't need your inheritance. I don't need your approval. And I certainly don't need to play your ultimatum game. But," her eyes softened, if only slightly, "once the renovations are finished, you are welcome to visit. As guests, not occupiers." With that, she left the table, her heels clicking firmly against the marble floor. Behind her, Robert and Eleanor sat hollow, their power dissolved. Father Michael bowed his head, perhaps in silent prayer, though for whom, Clara did not care to guess. As she stepped out into the night air, Clara inhaled deeply. The battle for her home was never only about property. It was about rewriting the terms of her life. For the first time, she felt not just like a survivor, but like the architect of her own future.